Imagine walking into a room. Nothing about you has changed overnight. Your bank account isn't overflowing. You're not wearing anything different. You didn't rehearse a single word. And yet somehow, the room responds to you differently. People interrupt you less. They lean in when you talk. Someone you barely know asks your opinion on something that actually matters to them. You don't notice it happening. You're too busy living your life. But everyone around you has already started updating the file they keep on you in their heads. Here's the strange part. You haven't even realized you're becoming successful yet. Because the earliest signs of wealth don't show up in a bank statement. They show up in behavior, in the way you speak, in what you no longer chase, in what you stop needing from other people. Today, we're going to walk through 6 of those signs, quiet ones, the kind nobody announces because nobody's watching for them, except the people around you, who notice long before you do. Let's start with the first one, and it's the one almost nobody expects. There's a version of a person who walks into every room, performing. Laughing slightly louder than the joke deserves. Mentioning the promotion before anyone asks. Steering conversations toward the vacation, the new car, the deal that almost closed. Then, at some point, that same person walks into a room and does none of it. They just sit down. They ask you about your week and actually wait for the answer. And somehow, without trying, they command more attention than they ever did while performing. People notice this shift almost immediately, even if they can't explain why. There's a particular kind of stillness that reads as security, and humans are wired to detect it, because for most of our evolutionary history, the person who didn't need to prove anything was the person who already had enough. The psychology here is simple, but it's rarely talked about. Impressing people is a transaction. You perform, they validate you, and for a moment, the anxiety quiets down. But it always comes back, because external validation is a loan, not a payment. You have to keep borrowing. Somewhere in the process of actually building something, a skill, a business, a stable life, that loan gets paid off. Not because the person decided to stop trying to impress others, but because the need underneath it quietly disappeared. There was nothing left to prove, so the performance had nowhere to live anymore. Think about the last time you met someone who didn't ask you what you did for a living, who didn't mention where they'd traveled, who just talked to you like a person. You probably remember that conversation more clearly than a dozen others, because it felt rare. It felt real. That's the tell. Not silence out of arrogance, silence out of enough. But here's what almost nobody notices about this shift. It doesn't just change how people see you, it changes what people can do to you. Which brings us to the second sign, and it's the one that protects everything else. A woman gets a phone call. Someone she used to work with, full of urgency, describing an opportunity that has to be decided on tonight. High pressure, emotional language. The kind of call designed to make you feel like slowing down means losing everything. A year earlier, she would have said yes on the spot. That night she says, "Send me the details. I'll look at it in the morning." The line goes quiet for a second. Then the caller backs off. That pause, that single sentence, is one of the clearest markers of a mind that has started operating differently. Manipulation, whether it's a bad investment pitch, a guilt trip, or a fake emergency, depends on one thing above all else: urgency. It needs you to react before you can think. People who are building real financial stability develop an almost involuntary resistance to that urgency. Not because they've read a book on negotiation, because they've been burned by rushing before, and the memory of that cost is louder than the pressure in front of them. This is the part people misunderstand. They think confidence with money looks like fast decisions and bold moves. Often it looks like the opposite. It looks like slowness. It looks like someone asking, "Why does this need to happen right now?" and meaning it. Watch how a person handles a pushy salesperson, a guilt-tripping relative, or a friend asking for just this once money. The people who've quietly built stability don't get defensive. They just don't move. And that stillness is unbearable to anyone trying to manipulate them, because manipulation only works on urgency, and urgency has nothing left to grab onto. That wasn't the biggest change, though. Because once someone stops being pushed around by pressure, something else starts happening around them. People start actually wanting to talk to them. Which brings us to the third sign. At a dinner table, there's usually one person everyone remembers afterward. It's rarely the person with the nicest watch or the newest car. It's the person who said something that made everyone go quiet for a second and think. There's a shift that happens as people build wealth that has almost nothing to do with money and everything to do with attention span. They start reading differently, thinking in longer arcs, noticing patterns in industries, in people, in decisions. And that thinking starts leaking into every conversation they have. This is where wealthy thinking quietly separates itself from wealthy appearance. A person can own an expensive car and still say nothing memorable at dinner. But a person whose mind has been sharpened by years of real decision-making, decisions with consequences, decisions that cost them something when they got it wrong, can't help but bring a different kind of value into a room. Their opinions carry weight because they were tested against reality, not opinions borrowed from somewhere else. People feel this even when they can't articulate it. They start remembering what that person said longer than what that person wore. They start bringing them into conversations they wouldn't normally be part of, not because of a title, but because their perspective adds something. This is the quiet transaction most people miss entirely. Possessions get noticed for a few seconds and forgotten by the next room. A genuinely useful thought gets repeated for years. Somewhere in the process of building something real, people start trading the first for the second, often without meaning to. Most people completely misunderstand this next part, though, because it's not really about intelligence. It's about time. Which brings us to sign number 4. A young couple is deciding between 2 job offers. One pays more right now. The other pays less, but it's inside a company that's clearly about to grow. Most people in the room push for the higher number. One person in the room asks a different question. Where will this put you in 5 years? That single sentence is the entire difference in how 2 minds are built. There's a well-documented psychological pattern that separates people who build lasting wealth from people who don't, and it has nothing to do with income. It's called time horizon, the length of the future someone is actually thinking about when they make a decision. Someone thinking in weekends asks, "What does this get me by Friday?" Someone thinking in years asks, "What does this position me for?" And here's the uncomfortable part. Thinking in years often looks worse in the short term. Less money now. Less comfort now. Less proof to show people right now. This is exactly why almost nobody does it. It requires tolerating a period where nothing seems to be happening, while trusting that something is being built underneath the surface. That kind of patience isn't a personality trait people are born with. It's a muscle that gets built the first time someone delays a reward and watches it actually pay off later. After that, the pattern repeats itself, quietly, for the rest of their life. People around them notice this shift before they do. They notice the friend who didn't panic sell, the co-worker who took the boring path that turned out to be the smart one, the relative who seemed to be doing nothing interesting for years, until suddenly they weren't doing nothing at all. The next sign is where everything shifts, though, because once someone starts thinking this way, something strange starts happening. People stop giving them advice, and they start asking for it. It happens gradually, and then all at once. A family member calls, not to check in, but to ask what they do in a specific situation. A co-worker starts quietly copying certain habits without admitting it. A friend says, half joking, "You always seem to have it figured out. What would you do?" Nobody sends out an announcement. There's no ceremony. But at some point, a person shifts from being someone who receives advice to someone who gives it, and everyone around them adjusts to that shift before they even notice it happening. This is one of the clearest, most reliable social signals of emerging stability, and almost nobody talks about it, because it doesn't feel dramatic. It feels like a normal conversation, but underneath it, something significant is happening. People are pattern matching. They're watching decisions play out over time. The calm reaction to bad news, the boring but consistent choices, the absence of panic, and quietly concluding that this person's judgment can be trusted. Trust like that isn't requested, it's observed, which is exactly why it feels different from flattery. Nobody asks a person for financial advice because they're impressed by what that person owns. They ask because they've watched how that person thinks over months or years, and they want access to that thinking. This is the moment where identity quietly flips. The advice seeker becomes the advice giver. And most people who experience this shift barely register it happening, because they're too focused on the next decision in front of them to notice how many people are now watching how they make it. There's one sign left, and it's the one that ties every other sign together. A man sits across from someone at a table, someone who's clearly trying to provoke a reaction, questioning his choices, hinting that he's made a mistake, waiting for him to defend himself. He doesn't. He just says, "Maybe, we'll see," and changes the subject. 10 years earlier, that same comment would have kept him up that night. He would have rehearsed comebacks in the shower the next morning. That night, he forgets about it by the time he gets home. This is the sign that almost nobody names correctly, because from the outside, it can look like indifference. It isn't. It's the result of years spent slowly, quietly, building something that no longer requires anyone else's approval to feel real. Early on, most people's decisions are haunted by an audience. What will people think if this fails? What will people say if I take the safe path? That audience, real or imagined, shapes almost every financial decision a person makes when they're starting out. But something happens after enough small wins accumulate, after enough boring, patient, unglamorous decisions quietly pay off. The audience gets smaller. Eventually, the only person left in the room whose opinion actually matters is the person making the decision. That's not arrogance. It's the final, quietest sign of all. Peace becomes more valuable than proving anything to anyone. And ironically, that's usually the exact moment other people start paying the most attention, because the person who no longer needs to be seen is, somehow, the one everyone can't stop noticing. So here's what all 6 of these signs actually have in common. None of them happened in a bank account first. The stillness instead of the performance, the pause instead of the panic, the depth instead of the display, the patience instead of the shortcut, the advice they started giving instead of asking for, the peace that replaced the need to prove anything at all. Every one of those changes happened inside a person before it ever showed up on paper. Identity moved first. Income followed later, quietly, the way a shadow follows a shape that's already changed. And the people around that person, the friends, the co-workers, the family at the dinner table, they didn't need a bank statement to know something had shifted. They felt it in the room. They felt it in the way that person listened and paused and no longer needed anything from them. The world usually notices your future before you do. If even one of these signs felt familiar, comment below, "I'm building quietly." And if you enjoy psychology, wealth, and success documentaries that actually make you think, subscribe, because the next lesson might change the way you see money forever.